America has just crossed a line no empire ever returned from. $38 trillion in national debt. That's $115,000 for every man, woman, and child, and it's growing by $1 trillion every 75 days. In 2025 alone, Washington spent $7 trillion while collecting only $5.2 trillion. Nearly $970 billion vanished just on interest payments, more than the entire U.S. defense budget. Every second, the debt climbs another $50,000. Every minute, another $3 million. It's not just unsustainable, it's mathematically impossible. The world's largest economy is now living entirely on borrowed time, borrowed money, and borrowed trust. The United States hides one of its greatest financial illusions behind a technical phrase: the fiscal year. Most Americans assume their government measures spending from January to December, like the rest of the world. It doesn't. Washington quietly resets its books every October 1st, and that single accounting shift lets the system disguise just how deep the debt crisis really runs. When the Treasury announced that the 2025 fiscal year ended with a $1.78 trillion deficit, officials claimed it was slightly better than last year's $1.83 trillion shortfall, as if trimming a few billion from a hemorrhage made it progress. But the truth is darker. This so-called improvement was built on delayed payments, shifted contracts, and short-term borrowing that simply pushed red ink into the next cycle. The fiscal year system acts like a curtain, slicing data at convenient political moments so the public never sees the full picture of how fast the hole is widening. Between July and September alone, nearly $400 billion in new debt was created, numbers that conveniently vanished from year-end reports because they technically belonged to next year. The manipulation isn't illegal, it's structural. It's how Washington keeps panic at bay while quietly sinking deeper into insolvency. The illusion becomes clearer when you track timing. The government borrows heavily in spring, covers itself in April when tax revenues temporarily surge, and then spends recklessly through the summer. Every fiscal year ends not with financial discipline but with a statistical reset. It's the economic equivalent of covering a crack with fresh paint. When politicians celebrate deficit reduction, what they're really showing is the success of their accounting calendar, not fiscal responsibility. That's why $1 trillion added in 75 days feels invisible. It's scattered across two fiscal calendars, presented as two manageable spikes instead of one national emergency. This accounting trick allows both parties to declare success, while America's total obligations keep exploding past $38 trillion, accelerating by $13 billion per day. The coherence of the crisis lies right here. America's debt isn't just growing, it's being timed to grow in a way that looks less catastrophic. The fiscal year mask turns collapse into continuity, disaster into paperwork. The result? A public that believes deficits are shrinking, while the Treasury quietly writes another IOU to the future. This isn't transparency. It's a ritual of deception dressed as budgeting, and it's the foundation of a financial system built entirely on illusion. The numbers don't lie. They expose the structure of failure. America's debt crisis isn't a sudden event. It's a mechanical process repeating every month with mathematical precision. The nation spends more than it earns, and to bridge that gap, it borrows. That's not a temporary imbalance. It's a perpetual motion machine fueled by deficits. Each new dollar of spending creates another dollar of dependency. The cycle never resets. It compounds. In 2025, there wasn't a single consistent month of stability. The Treasury's own records show brief moments of surplus, mostly in April, when tax filings flood in. But these aren't victories. They're statistical mirages. Once the tax inflow dries, the system snaps back into deficit, and the Treasury immediately resumes borrowing. Every other month bleeds red ink, adding billions to the total debt. The surplus months are just enough to keep the illusion of balance alive for public consumption. Behind the scenes, the real engine is powered by constant shortfalls, each funded through new Treasury securities. These securities are promises, IOUs, to investors, foreign governments, and pension funds, that one day will have to be repaid with interest. Yet repayment never happens in full. It's simply rolled over into new debt. The government doesn't pay down obligations. It refinances them again and again. It's the same strategy as maxing out a credit card, paying the minimum, then opening another one to cover the balance. Except this isn't a household. It's a $38 trillion economy pretending it's solvent. This pattern creates what economists quietly call structural insolvency. The US isn't technically bankrupt because it can still issue new debt. But that's a hollow definition of solvency. Survival through continuous borrowing. Every deficit widens the hole. Every interest payment accelerates the descent. The fiscal year trick hides it in quarters. The mechanism exposes it in motion. And here's the most dangerous part. There's no pause button. The system can't simply stop spending or halt interest payments without triggering a global panic. The government isn't just borrowing money, it's borrowing time. Each bond sold buys a few more months of political silence. Each deficit recorded is another countdown tick in America's slow-motion financial implosion. Every empire falls for the same reason. It begins to consume more than it produces. America is no different. In 2025, the federal government collected $5.23 trillion in total revenue while spending $7 trillion. That's not a deficit, that's an addiction. For every dollar Washington earns, it spends $1.34. This isn't about mismanagement or politics anymore. It's arithmetic decay. Over half of that $5.23 trillion comes directly from personal income taxes. Roughly $2.65 trillion drained from workers' paychecks. Another $1.48 trillion comes from FICA taxes. The Social Security and Medicare deductions you see disappearing every payday. That means nearly 80% of America's entire revenue is extracted from individuals, not corporations, not billionaires, not trade, but everyday citizens. By comparison, corporate taxes bring in only $452 billion, barely enough to fund 6 weeks of interest payments. The balance, a mere $195 billion, comes from customs duties and tariffs, crumbs in a system addicted to trillions. This structure exposes a brutal imbalance. The economy's lifeblood flows upward, while the cost of maintenance spreads downward. America's income depends on taxing labor, while its spending depends on promises that future labor will somehow be worth more. But the math has broken. Inflation has eroded wage growth, tax receipts are plateauing, and entitlement costs are accelerating faster than revenue. The result is a financial metabolism that burns energy faster than it can generate it. What makes this cycle even more dangerous is its normalization. Politicians label overspending as stimulus, interest payments as obligations, and debt expansion as investment. These words disguise a truth too large to admit. The United States has built a permanent deficit economy. The numbers confirm it. $5 trillion collected, $7 trillion spent, $1.78 trillion borrowed every year without interruption. At this scale, the debt isn't just a number, it's a system of dependency. Each borrowed dollar sustains programs that cannot function without the next one. Each interest payment ensures the next will be larger. The United States isn't financing growth, it's financing the illusion of stability. And as this gap widens, the foundation beneath the world's largest economy begins to crack, silently, mechanically, and irreversibly. There's a cost to every borrowed dollar. And now, that cost is consuming the system itself. In 2025, the US government spent $970 billion just on interest payments, more than the entire national defense budget of $917 billion. For the first time in modern history, America paid more to service old debt than to protect its borders. That's not a coincidence, it's a turning point. Nearly 1 out of every 5 tax dollars collected, 18.5% of total revenue, is instantly lost to interest. Nothing is built, repaired, or improved. It simply disappears into the past. This is how empires collapse quietly, not through invasion, but through compound interest. The Treasury owes interest on $38 trillion of existing debt, and those payments grow automatically, regardless of policy or politics. Even if every federal agency froze spending tomorrow, interest would keep accumulating, pushing the total higher each quarter. Unlike discretionary programs, interest is non-negotiable. It must be paid, even if it means borrowing more to do so. A spiral that feeds itself. The Federal Reserve has tried to manage this by adjusting rates, but even that tool is becoming useless. When rates rise, borrowing costs explode. When rates fall, inflation surges. It's no longer a choice between good and bad outcomes, only between slow destruction and fast collapse. Even if the Fed slashed rates to near zero again, the savings would be marginal. With $38 trillion outstanding, even a 1% change equals nearly $380 billion a year in new obligations. This is the nature of the trap. America's debt has reached a magnitude where interest itself has become the economy's largest single growth engine. But it produces nothing. Every treasury bond rolled over, every deficit funded, only expands the burden. The nation now borrows money to pay interest on money it borrowed decades ago. This is no longer economics. It's self-cannibalization disguised as fiscal policy. The mechanism that once built highways, schools, and infrastructure now sustains nothing but the weight of its own promises. The interest machine doesn't rest, doesn't vote, doesn't compromise. It just collects. And every dollar it takes brings the United States one step closer to a point where servicing the debt becomes indistinguishable from default itself. If America wanted to stop the bleeding, it would need to make impossible choices. Cut so deep, they would tear the political and social fabric of the nation. To balance the current $1.78 trillion annual deficit, the government would have to erase entire programs, not trim them. But every program represents millions of lives, votes, and dependencies. That's why nothing changes. The math isn't political, it's terminal. Start with Social Security, the largest single expense at $1.5 trillion. Eliminating it completely wouldn't even balance the budget. Yet 72 million Americans rely on those checks to survive. Cutting a fraction would ignite mass outrage and political suicide. The same logic applies to Medicare and Medicaid, which together exceed $1.4 trillion. Any attempt to reduce them would instantly destabilize healthcare systems, raise mortality rates, and collapse public trust. These are not policy levers, they're social explosives. Then there's interest, nearly $1 trillion and untouchable. You can't default without detonating the dollar's credibility and triggering global panic. The world holds US bonds because they're supposed to be risk-free. Failing to pay would shatter that illusion in seconds, destroying America's reserve currency status and sending borrowing costs into orbit. The government can't cut this category, and it can't afford to fund it, a paradox without resolution. What's left are the fragments. Income security programs like SNAP, low-income housing, veterans benefits, roughly $700 billion combined. Cutting them wouldn't close the gap. It would only expose the cruelty of an empire abandoning its weakest. That's the core dilemma. Every dollar has a human consequence, and every reduction breeds revolt. The numbers are so large that even total elimination of smaller departments wouldn't move the deficit needle by 1%. So the only option left is illusion. Borrowing to appear functional, printing to delay collapse. It's not governance anymore, it's triage. Politicians know the cost of truth. The moment they confront it, the system cracks. So they pretend progress exists while the debt machine keeps devouring the future. America isn't debating where to cut. It's deciding who to sacrifice. And so far, the answer has been the same. Everyone who still believes the numbers can be fixed. When a nation reaches the point where even survival has consequences, every decision becomes a weapon. America's economy now stands between two outcomes: default or inflation. Both destroy wealth, both erode trust, but in different ways. Default collapses the system instantly. Inflation rots it quietly from within. The government's only control is choosing the speed of decline. If Washington stopped paying its creditors, the global financial structure would fracture overnight. The US dollar is the foundation of the world's reserves. It underpins trade, banking, and every major asset market. A single default would detonate that system, vaporizing trillions in global holdings and obliterating the credibility that sustains America's borrowing power. The dollar's status as the world's reserve currency isn't just prestige, it's oxygen. Losing it would send interest rates soaring, banks scrambling for liquidity, and the value of every American savings account into free fall. That is why default, while unthinkable, remains technically possible. The alternative is equally destructive: endless inflation through monetary expansion. When deficits grow uncontrollably, the Federal Reserve becomes the silent accomplice. It buys the government's debt, creating new dollars to keep the machine running. That process devalues every existing dollar in circulation. It's not a mistake, it's a mechanism. Inflation is the hidden tax that requires no vote, no debate, and no accountability. It steals purchasing power while preserving political calm. But the trade-off is brutal. Each round of monetary easing postpones collapse, but magnifies it. The Fed's current 4% benchmark rate still leaves the Treasury paying almost $1 trillion annually in interest. Reducing that rate might save $200 billion temporarily, but it reignites inflation, slamming consumers with higher prices and erasing wage gains. There is no stable equilibrium anymore, only delayed crisis. This is the monetary dead end. Default triggers global panic. Inflation corrodes domestic stability. Every lever the government pulls feeds one disaster to prevent another. That's not policy. It's economic triage at planetary scale. America is no longer deciding how to grow, but how to fail more slowly. Each printed dollar, each bond issued, each rate adjustment only deepens the trap. And the deeper it goes, the narrower the path becomes between survival and collapse. Every administration promises discipline, and everyone spends more than the last. That isn't political coincidence. It's structural corruption disguised as governance. The national debt isn't a partisan issue. It's a bipartisan addiction. Each president inherits a fiscal bomb already ticking and chooses to extend the timer instead of cutting the wire. Bush added $5.8 trillion, Obama $8.6 trillion, Trump $7.8 trillion, Biden over $6 trillion, and none reversed the trend. Every era justified it with a new excuse: war, recession, pandemic, recovery. The reasons change, the outcome doesn't. This is how illusion replaces accountability. Leaders project optimism, celebrate marginal declines in deficits, and call them progress, knowing the total debt never decreases. They speak of job growth while borrowing money to fund the paychecks. They promote stimulus as prosperity, ignoring that every new trillion borrowed steals from the next generation. It's not hope, it's optics. The illusion of control keeps the public calm, while the system unravels in slow motion beneath the surface. Both political parties rely on the same deception: shifting blame while spending equally. Conservatives defend tax cuts that shrink revenue. Liberals defend entitlement programs that balloon costs. Together, they sustain the very deficit they claim to fight. The truth is neither side wants balance, because balance demands sacrifice, and sacrifice costs elections. So the spending continues, hidden behind patriotic slogans and manipulated data. The budget hearings, the debt ceiling debates, the last-minute deals, all theater. They end the same way every time. Another extension, another increase, another trillion quietly added overnight. The national debt has become the only bipartisan achievement in modern history. It rises no matter who wins. The illusion works because it offers emotional security. The public hears growth, recovery, and record employment, while the debt clock accelerates by the second. But numbers don't care about narratives. America's credit rating has already been downgraded. Global confidence is thinning. Foreign buyers are diversifying away from U.S. bonds. What remains is the facade of strength, a hollow currency backed by the faith of a divided population. The political illusion of hope isn't leadership, it's anesthesia, a temporary numbness masking a terminal condition that no election will ever cure. Every debt crisis reaches a point where arithmetic overtakes politics. a point where no policy, rate cut, or stimulus can reverse the curve. America is nearing that line. The debt now expands faster than the economy itself, consuming more than it creates. When interest costs approach $1 trillion, when deficits exceed 6% of GDP, when borrowing replaces productivity, the system isn't strained, it's structurally failing. This isn't speculation, it's mathematics approaching critical mass. The next phase won't arrive as a headline or a sudden crash. It will unfold quietly, through rising yields, vanishing buyers, and fading confidence. Already, global investors are reducing exposure to U.S. Treasuries, forcing the government to pay higher rates just to attract new money. That feedback loop accelerates the collapse. The more the Treasury borrows, the more expensive borrowing becomes. It's the same pattern that dismantled empires. Slow erosion, then instantaneous failure. At this scale, even small shifts become lethal. A 1% increase in average interest rates adds nearly $380 billion annually to obligations. A mild recession slashes revenue while forcing new stimulus. These dual pressures form a trap with no exit. The government cannot cut, cannot default, cannot grow fast enough to stabilize. It can only inflate or borrow, both of which deepen the imbalance. The result is an economy balancing on momentum alone. The stock market thrives on liquidity injections, not real productivity. Consumer spending is propped up by credit expansion, not income growth. Every number that looks healthy, employment, GDP, retail sales, is tethered to an unsustainable foundation of printed money and mounting interest. Once that liquidity slows, the facade shatters. There's a threshold no superpower has ever crossed and recovered. When interest payments surpass discretionary spending and begin devouring total revenue, America is already on the edge of that transformation. Once it crosses, the system won't correct itself. It will reset violently. The collapse won't begin with panic. It will begin with silence. Bond markets tightening, currencies devaluing, and the world slowly realizing that the safest asset on Earth has become the most dangerous liability. The countdown isn't approaching. It's already underway. The illusion of control is fading. The numbers are no longer abstract. They are the pulse of a system gasping for air. $38 trillion in national debt isn't just a balance sheet entry. It's the cost of every promise the country couldn't afford but made anyway. Every trillion added isn't growth. It's erosion disguised as stability. What once symbolized strength has turned into dependency, where survival itself requires endless borrowing. The United States is now financing its past at the expense of its future. The interest on yesterday's mistakes consumes tomorrow's potential. Each new dollar printed doesn't create prosperity. It dilutes it. Inflation is not the failure of policy, it's the evidence of denial. The empire is still running, but not on production or innovation. It runs on inertia, hope, and the memory of power. No nation in history has ever sustained a debt this vast without consequence. The Roman Empire debased its currency to delay collapse. Britain lost its dominance under the weight of war debts. Now America faces its reckoning, not from foreign enemies, but from its own arithmetic. The numbers have turned against their creator. What happens next won't be a sudden explosion. It will be a slow disintegration, confidence slipping, currencies weakening, bonds losing buyers, and faith dissolving. The collapse will not start with panic in the streets, but with silence in the markets, when no one believes the promise anymore. For decades, debt built comfort, funded illusion, and silenced accountability. Now, it demands payment, not in dollars, but in trust, value, and credibility. This isn't a forecast or a warning. It's the visible trajectory of a nation refusing to face its math. This isn't just numbers. This is the end of an era,